Okay, so with that, we're about 5 minutes in. Let's go ahead and get started, everyone. So yeah, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. This is our 6th event for the 10th Annual Animal Law Review Symposium. I do just want to note that unlike previous ALR Symposium events that we've had so far, the format of this event is different, as you can tell. This is not a webinar. We just wanted to kind of promote community, foster engagement. So we've changed this format so that you can have your cameras on. And we do recommend that, but we also want to note that this event will be recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, then I recommend turning that camera off. But at the end of the presentation, we will host a Q&A. So please submit your questions either in the chat box, or you can use the raise hand function at the end of the presentation. And my colleague Miranda will be moderating that Q&A, and she will, if you have your hand up, she will call on you to ask your question. And if you prefer to have your question, in the chat anonymously, you can go ahead and directly send your question to Miranda. It's Miranda Eisen. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So today we are super honored to have writer, educator, and activist Pattrice Jones join us for a discussion on the connections between queer rights, feminism, and animal liberation. Pattrice is the co-founder of Vine Sanctuary, an LGBTQ-led farmed animal refuge that works for social and environmental justice, as well as animal liberation. As an ecofeminist scholar with more than 40 years of experience in social justice activism, Pattrice speaks and publishes widely on the topic of using ecological strategies to solve systemic problems. So with that, Pattrice, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks to everybody who is attending. For those who didn't hear me say it earlier, I'm very grateful to anyone who turns on their camera so that I don't feel like I'm talking into a void. But I, of course, as a particularly camera shy person, I completely understand if you don't feel comfortable doing that. And I do need to give, I don't know if it's an apology or an acknowledgement that I've had a bit of a disorienting day that led me to be a bit more jangled and a bit less grounded than I would normally like to be when I give a talk. And so there may be even more stuttering than usual. I'm hoping that there won't be too many tangents, but it could happen. And I apologize in advance if that's the case. But as a bonus, I will share with you what I do when I try to get more grounded for things. Now, everybody knows about taking a deep breath. Not everybody knows that that your parasympathetic nervous system, that's the part of your nervous system that calms you down, is activated when you breathe out for a longer period of time than you breathe in. So I tend to breathe breathe in on one count and then breathe out a little bit longer. But now here's the special Pattrice Jones method of being calmed down by breathing. Every time I take a breath when I'm trying to calm down, what I remember is that I'm breathing in the exhalation of trees. So whether you've thought about this or not, photosynthesis is the process by which trees and other plants turn sunshine into sugar. And in the process of doing this, they breathe in carbon dioxide and they breathe out oxygen, without which none of us would be alive. And so, and I breathe in, I just think about, I'll even look at any trees I can see and imagine that they breathed out the air that I'm breathing in. And I remember that the trees have been here for me for like as long as I've been here. And it helps. So by way of, and that's not at all, that's not entirely beside the point of what I'm here to talk to you about today. You will see behind me a photograph from springtime of Vine Sanctuary. And this is a part on the margins of the sanctuary. And if I move away, then you'll be able to see that there's a porcupine who surprised me one day by just ambling down the road and then into the trees, standing up on two legs, which is not something I knew porcupines did, to nibble at leaves. And so I use this as my Zoom background to remind me of something I'm about to tell you, but also to remind me that you never know what you're going to see if you just decenter the human. So let me tell you more about Vine and the topic of today's talk by reading a passage from an article that I'm pretty sure you haven't read because it appears in a fairly obscure scholarly journal. What I would like you to do while I'm reading these few paragraphs is whatever it is that you need to do to like help you visualize what it is that I'm describing. Like some people, they close their eyes, some people, they stare off into space, but try to see it, okay? Nod if you're on camera, and it's okay. All right, good. All right, here we go. I live in an enchanted forest. In the 100-acre wood occupied by the denizens of Vine Sanctuary, an animal refuge established by LGBTQ people, beech trees synchronize their photosynthesis so that all may share the sugar. Flying squirrels nest with birds in the cavities of hollow trees and might stick their heads out to see who's there if you come knocking at dusk. Wild turkey hens collaboratively raise their young, sometimes taking them on walks to visit Pete and Repeat, two captive-born toms who share a coop with chickens rescued from egg factories. In the wooded back pastures, a cow who rescued herself and her calf from a beef farm mingles with dozens of similarly self-possessed bovines. If you hike up to visit, their pheasant friend, who rewilded himself after being hatched to be hunted, might fly alongside you for a moment before returning to his own projects. Down at the duck pond, feral descendants of birds purchased at pet stores socialize with wild waterfowl. Back at the barn, sheep give rides to roosters, and a group of peacekeeping geese help with the project of rehabilitating roosters formerly used in cockfighting. So that's where I live. And it is an enchanted forest. But what I want you to know is that you live in an enchanted forest too. Wherever you are, there's some trees somewhere. They're not only providing you with that oxygen, but they're communicating with each other in ways that you can't even begin to actually imagine happening. They may be sending signals to each other underground via networks of fungi. They may be hearing or smelling chemical signals that they send to each other. They may be synchronizing, they're blossoming. It's a big world. And it's a queer world, which we'll get to. But I would like you, before we get to the queerness, to just sit for the moment with the idea that you live in a much more enchanted forest than you realize. And then sit with the fact that the forest is on fire right now. And so the question becomes, what do we do about that? And the topic of this talk is queering animal liberation, because I do believe that queering our efforts, not just on behalf of non-human animals, but on behalf of the whole larger than human world, is necessary. That queer eros, that eros, which is queer, may be the only thing that can save us. Now, when I talk about queering something, I'm not just talking about sexual orientation, although that's there too. But with those of us who have been doing queer activism, queer theory in the academy, queer all sorts of things, to talk about queering something, we're not just talking about some sort of mundane inclusion of LGBTQ people or perspectives, although that's important too, but we're talking about the original meaning of the word queer. A biologist named J.B.S. Haldane once said, the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, it's queerer than we can suppose. And he's using queer here in the sense of strange, different, other than what you imagined, right? And so when we talk about queering, what we're talking about is seeing things from different perspectives, seeing the normal as if it were strange and magical, seeing the strange as if it were normal, seeing the eros that infuses everything. And by eros, I mean the drive for relationship. Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Good, good. So we're talking about looking anew. And now an aside here, I know that not everybody here is a law student, but this is a presentation for an animal law series. And so I am periodically going to make sure I say a few things that specifically relate to this too. So I just want to say, and I do mean queering the legal system too. And I do mean looking at the ways that the system itself intersects with the problems we're trying to solve, looking at laws and lawyers and police and prisons which come along with laws and lawyers in a variety of ways. Okay. So for me, when I want to look at something new, I say to myself, well, okay, how did we get here? How did we get here? And of course, we don't have time in a presentation and discussion that's only going to last an hour and a half to do a deep dive into world history. So we'll just talk about how we got here in this place, the Americas, concerning these problems that we're talking about, not just the animal rights questions that animal law scholars are thinking about, but also the concerns of wild or free-living animals, which of course then leads us right to the environment. Hate that word environment, by the way, right? Like it's the background and we're the center. Just that's the kind of digression that I told you might happen because I'm a little more jangled than usual. Okay, so how did we get here? Quiet as it's kept, cows are not native to the Americas, nor chickens, nor pigs. Cows came over with Columbus, literally, along with cockfighting, patriarchy, homophobia, literal gold digging, and the beginnings of the modern nation state with its laws and armies and polices. And I hope you can just join me in seeing that the path from that invasion of violent invasion of both people and animals made into property and land made into property, and patriarchy leads us pretty directly to modern problems like toxic masculinity, capitalism, factory farming, reprocentrism, and climate change. And if we had time today, we could unpack each one of those, right? And we could, when we unpack them, we could not only see sort of their history, but we could also see their entanglement with each other. And doing that for any one of them, right, could be a whole book, a whole week seminar. So I'm trusting on you connecting a lot of these dots, and maybe asking if any of the connections aren't clear when we get to the discussion. So there are so many, and I'll just talk about a few centered on animals here at the sanctuary and what I learned from them. So Vine sanctuaries in Vermont now, more than 700 non-human animals live here at the sanctuary. But it all began about 21 years ago, when co-founder Miriam Jones and I found a chicken by the side of the road in the part of the country where factory farming of chickens was invented and perfected, the Delmarva Peninsula, which is a peninsula that's got little bits of Maryland and Virginia and Delaware, and where they kill and cut up more than 1 million birds a day. We found a chicken who had leapt or fallen from a truck headed for the factory, and we brought her home. And if we had longer, I could amuse you with the stories of what happens when two lesbian feminists who grew up in cities and have never been in the company of a chicken, much less tried to rescue one from the side of the road, did. But I can tell you that the answer to the question, why did the chicken cross the road, is to get away from Miriam. But we got her, and we brought her home, and we got attached to her, and created a little place in the garage for her, and brought her in at night on the nights when it would be too cold, and she would stay in the bathroom because that's the only place where you're safe from dogs. And you spend some time in the bathroom, and so we got to know her sort of intimately. I noticed that she had my grandmother's eyes, as well as her personality, charming yet stubborn. And then she started making these weird, like, cackling noises. And so I thought to myself, oh, she's laying an egg, right? And so I look under where she is, but no. Another time, same thing. She makes this cackling noise. I'm imagining all those chickens in the cartoons, and I'm like, where's the egg? We're looking under all the bushes. There's no egg. Another morning, I go out to let her out first thing in the morning, and I'm hearing this like choking sound in there, and I'm thinking, oh my God, she's sick, and where am I going to find a vet who's going to take care of this chicken in this place that is dedicated to the killing of chickens? But then she stopped coughing. Finally, someone who had a little bit more knowledge than we did happened to visit and took one look at Moselle, named after my grandmother, and said, that's a rooster. And so, and what was happening with those sounds she was making is that roosters, when they reach adolescence, are remarkably like human males at that age. Suddenly their feet get very big and their voices start to change. And they're like this because they're trying to crow, but they can't quite crow yet. And so there's this period of like choking noises until finally that resolves itself from choking into right. So so that's all amusing. But here's what's not amusing was that then my feelings changed. Like that word rooster, like went right into my head, and I was like, roosters? Like, well, we all know what roosters are like, right? They're cocky and they're aggressive and they want to rule the roost. And but then I'm having a fight with myself because this bird who I've come to love is not in fact cocky or aggressive and has shown no inclination whatsoever to want to rule any roost. So I realized that it was like I was suddenly looking at this bird through like stereotype spectacles. And because I am a feminist, I was a feminist. Right away, I'm like, well, you know, where did these ideas come from? I don't like to be tricked by stereotypes, and I especially don't like to be tricked by stereotypes that like interfere with my relationships to someone that I've grown to care for. And so I really thought about it. I really thought about it, and I thought, well, the first thing I thought was, where did I get these ideas? I grew up in Baltimore City. It's not like I was on a farm and my grandmother sat me down and lectured me on the differences between roosters and hens. I'm quite certain that no one had ever had any kind of conversation with me about roosters and hens, and yet I was quite certain that I knew what roosters were like. And so where did those ideas come from? And I realized it was from children's books and cartoons and other media consumed by people too young to realize that they're being indoctrinated into gender stereotypes by means of cute animal stories. And so that's what led me to develop something that I've written about quite a bit, which is the social construction of gender by means of animals. Because animals are, in our mind, right, there's a big divide between humans and nature, and animals are on the side of nature. And so if something is true for animals, then it must be natural. And so if we ascribe these stereotypes to male and female animals, then we can point to them and say, well, look, it's natural. It's natural for males to be inherently aggressive and violent. And that's what cockfighting turns out to be all about. Tricking and torturing male birds into acting out our stereotypes of masculinity so as to make it possible to claim that this is some inherent element of maleness. And the same is done with regard to female animals and stereotypes of passivity and overwhelming interest in motherhood, etc. So notice that now we can see really directly one of these intersections, right? So now we can see really directly the way that a particular form of animal abuse is dreadfully injurious to animals. We don't have time for me to go through the horrors of that blood sport. But suffice it to say, in the wild, where jungle fowl, who are the living ancestors of all modern chickens and who are genetically more or less indistinguishable from all but the most misshapen of chickens due to our genetic depredations, Roosters, there are multiple roosters per flock, and they cooperate to do various things, which are, there are some roles that are roles for roosters, but they're not about murdering each other, and they're not about fighting to the death. They're about singing to each other. That crowing is roosters telling each other when foraging in the deep forests of South Asia, I'm over here and everything's okay over here. Oh, well, I'm over here and everything's okay over here. Well, I'm over here and everything's okay over here. And they do that all day long so that they can keep track of each other, and they listen. And then if one gives an alarm cry, they all take up the alarm cry, and they're different alarm cries depending on what kind of danger there is. And they're all clear signals. So none of this is what the perpetrators of cockfighting would tell you is natural rooster behavior, right? They say that roosters, if they just naturally fight each other to the death. So this is dreadfully injurious to the animals, but it's done and has been done for millennia in many different places, in all of which the men who do it claim it's our special culture. But that's a different conversation. But it's done as a reflection of and a perpetuation of ideas about masculinity that are deeply harmful to people, that lead more or less directly to domestic violence and other forms of intimate partner violence, that are harmful to boys and men too, because they're schooled to ignore their feelings, etc., hide weakness, all of the things that you know are associated with toxic masculinity. So this is a perfect example of one of these intersections, where we can see a form of animal abuse that both reflects and perpetuates a form of inequality among humans. And it hurts all of us. It hurts the animals, it hurts the humans. By the way, or not by the way, but just as a aside, this is what we're talking about. Those of us who talk about looking at the interconnectedness of oppressions, or use the original use of the word intersectionality, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about looking at the ways that different forms, allegedly different forms of, and that have specific differences, different forms of oppression, working together to create new forms of harm and to prop each other up. And the idea being, if we can find those intersections, one, we're just going to have a better analysis, a more accurate analysis of the problem. But also, when we see those intersections, they're going to be places where interventions may be most impactful, if that makes sense. So as a result of learning that roosters were not, in fact, the people that the stereotypes would have them to be, that did lead us to be willing to take in a huge group of roosters, even though we were a quite new sanctuary. We took in 24 roosters all together who had been living together in the open barn on the property of a animal control officer who whenever she seized roosters from cruelty, she could never find a place to place them, so she would just keep them, right? And so they were all getting along together, but then she lost the lease to her land, and she wanted to retire anyway. Called all the sanctuaries. Every single sanctuary told her, no, roosters can't live together. We have one rooster and we're not taking any more. And she was like, but they all live together. You can't tell me that they can't live together. They all live together. And so when she reached us, she was in tears, and we were pretty scared because we were pretty new, but we said, okay. And they taught me, why I'm mentioning them is that they're the ones who taught me what I needed to know in order to then devise a method for the rehabilitation of roosters used in cockfighting. That was back in the early 2000s, and we were the first ones to do it. Everybody said it couldn't be done. And now lots of people use the method, and we can't begin to save all the roosters who are seized from cockfighting, but at least some are now able to live peacefully in flocks. So that's roosters and toxic masculinity. And let's see, what was the other story I wanted to tell you that we could learn something? Oh, I'm going to tell you about some ducks. How many people here? I'm seeing very few of you, but how many of you know, oh, the cat is moving behind Melissa. You were so still, I thought you might be a photo, but then the cat moved. It was beautiful. I'm sure there's a lesson there. So ducks are among the most delightful people you'll ever meet. If you were to be here at the sanctuary and you were to be with me, be with us when we're opening up in the morning, one, you would never ever be tempted to call yourself or any other animal advocate the voice of the voiceless, because it's very loud. And you would then never forget that animals indeed have voices, as well as many other ways of saying what they want or don't want. But the other thing is, you would see ducks flooding out into the duck pond, into the duck puddles, into the snowbanks, swimming in the rain, but also looking back at you, and probably having conversations with each other about you. And there's really nothing to knock you down off of your human hubris than to, have a group of ducks talk smack about you to each other. But it all started for us when we were able to take in a group of ducks who had been rescued from a foie gras factory. At that point, we had only welcomed chickens, but they needed a home. They were from an open rescue that we couldn't for a long time admit that's where they came from, but they came from the open rescue called the Delicacy of Despair. There's still a video about it online that you can see. And so we had to figure out what to do with these pretty gigantic ducks. The ducks used by animal agriculture are so-called mule ducks, who are the offspring of Muscovy ducks, who are very big and native to Brazil, and Pekin ducks or mallard ducks. And so 8 of the 12 ducks who had been rescued came to us, and none of our barns, none of our coops were big enough for all 8 of them to join the chickens who are already there. So what we did was we looked at, we observed them and tried to figure out like who's friends with who, and had 4 in one coop and 4 in the other. And the coops, they shared like one tall fence so they could talk to each other through the fence. But there was a gap. So anyway, the ducks moved in, and we were delighted by the ducks, and we loved the ducks, and the ducks were so amazingly interested in the chickens. They adopted this one chicken who had come to us he fell off a truck. He had a broken leg, a broken wing, a broken beak. We called him Chumbawamba because, when he gets knocked down, he gets back up again, and he healed, but he still had a limp. And for whatever reason, he just didn't quite get on with the other chickens. They were like, join the ducks. So you see these ducks walking around foraging with this rooster limping along behind them. So I was really, really surprised then one day when they'd only been there about a week or two. I came out to do something in the afternoon, put down fresh hay, check the water, I don't know what, and 2 of them were fighting. And I'm like, this is a sanctuary. You can't be fighting. Like even fighting roosters don't fight here. You cannot be fighting. So I looked at the fighting, and I sort of figured out who was the aggressor, and I took the one who was being aggressed, and I took him to the other coop. So I separated him. Did whatever I was going to do, went back in the house, came out an hour later, and the one I had removed was like in the desperate throes of climbing one last fence to get back to the one he had been fighting with. And now what you need to know is that to do this, he actually had to like walk through the yard, climb a 6-foot fence, walk through the woods, make a sharp left turn, walk down the road, make a left turn into the driveway, and then he encountered the one last fence that I saw him climbing up. So I was like, okay, clearly you're friends. And I lifted him back up over the fence, and they talked to each other. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, you're friends. You were just having an argument. Fine. I won't interfere anymore. Did whatever I was going to do, probably putting down fresh straw, turn around, they're fighting again. So again, I take the victim and I put him in the other coop. Hour later, come back out, same thing. This time he's like at the top of the fence, just about to jump down to join his friend again. 3 times this happened before I literally hit my head with my hand in a cartoon gesture, because I realized that it wasn't fighting, it was sex. And they were boyfriends, and I kept separating them, and he just kept climbing that fence and walking through the woods and walking down the road and back up the driveway to get to his boyfriend again. We named them Jean-Paul and Jean-Claude, because they both looked, they were white, but they had these little black on their heads that looked like berets. And once I quit interfering with them, they were partners for life. They slept together each night, hung out all day, not monogamous. I mean, they were ducks. But they were together until, my gosh, it was 8 years later, finally, that Jean-Paul died, and of the liver disease that the foie gras factory probably was responsible for. And then within less than a week, Jean-Claude, who had seemed to be perfectly fine, died as well. Now, here's the thing. That quote that I told you before about nature being queerer than we can suppose, the first time I read it was in this book called Biological Exuberance, which looks backward to you. Giant book. It's all about animal homosexuality and natural diversity. It lists the 300, 400 species of non-human animal in which same-sex intercourse, partnering, courtship, parenting, affection occur. I had read that book. I knew very well that, at least in my head, I knew very well that all male ducks are functionally bisexual. And yet, my own, and I'm queer, and yet my own presumptions about animal heterosexuality were so strong that it took 3 times of seeing this fighting for me to recognize that it was sex. So again, I found myself in this situation of asking myself, what has happened here? You know, what has skewed my ability to see what's going on here? And what does it mean? and that led me to really think about all of the ways that we are told that non-human animals are reproducing automatons, right? Nature programs, zoos, simplistic treatments of evolutionary theory based on sexual selection, all of them depicting non-human animals, and all of their behavior is seen through the lens of, does it make reproduction more or less likely? And we're schooled to look at them and to observe their behavior and analyze their behavior, interpret their behavior through this lens of heteronormativity, right? And that hurts everybody again. It hurts non-human animals in several ways. One, just because it leads us to see them in ways that's not true and doesn't reflect their true diversity. Two, reproducing automatons don't have feelings. They don't fall in love. They don't mourn when you take their partner away from them. It's much easier to lock a non-reproducing an automaton up in a foie gras factory or a vivisection lab, right? If you admit that non-human animals are getting it on just for the fun of it, if you admit that they are bonding just because they wanna, not in order to co-parent, well then you've got to rethink a lot about animals themselves. So it hurts animals, but it also hurts people. It hurts LGBTQ people, right? What's the number one thing after, God said it's a sin, that gets said to it? It's not natural. It's not natural. Same for those of us who might want to parent in same-sex relationships. It's not natural, but it is natural for lots of different species. So actually the question for us is, what's natural for our species? And for our species, it's definitely natural. I'm not so sure about the sapiens, but Homo for sure. So here again, we can see an idea brought to these shores by European imperialists, then working its way into the ways we treat ducks. And my gosh, they wouldn't be them if they hadn't then, turned the Brazilian ducks into property when they had never been property before. All coalescing into this this way of seeing and thinking about non-human animals that turns out to reflect our own preoccupations more than it reflects their reality, and which enables or facilitates their misuse, while at the same time bolstering a kind of inequality among human beings, right? And of course the answer is to become more queer. So I would normally move on towards a conclusion in order to allow for discussion, and I will be doing that soon. But since I'm talking to the law students, I need us to just make sure we see that the way of thinking, brought to these shores by gunpoint, by first the conquistadors and then the pilgrims with their muskets, was imposed by violence, set up a series of laws that were only reflected the interest of a subset of humans. But all humans were expected to follow them, in fact, required to follow them, upon pain of imprisonment or worse. And because, like, if there's just a set of rules among human beings that's about how are we going to treat each other, that's fine, right? I mean, that's fine. If we've got a book club, we might have some rules. We might even, if it turns out we're worried that some people talk over other people, we might make a rule about how long you can talk. We might even appoint somebody to enforce that rule. And that would all be cool. So I'm not saying that it's inherently oppressive for humans to come up with some rules about how they're going to treat each other. But what the problem we had here was that you have this group of humans coming up with rules that reflect only their interests. And the rules aren't just about how are we going to treat each other, but they're also about how are we going to divide up all of these natural features and animals and other humans who we've decided are property. And what are our rules going to be for how we manage that property or share that property or use that property or fight one another about that property, right? And so within these systems, some entities are sort of inherently outlaws in two senses of the word: outlaws in the sense of not protected by the laws, and outlaws in the sense of, breaking rules that they didn't have any say in creating to begin with, right? And so many humans and non-humans have been in the category of outlaw, right? Whether you were an enslaved person who stole your freedom and created theft and were considered a thief for doing so, or whether if you're an animal who trespasses onto private property and is shot for doing so. If we're thinking about the queerness, for a long time, queers were those of us who were homosexual, at least, and trans folk as well, were outlaws in both senses of the word, because the very act of sex was in many cases, homosexual sex was in many cases outlawed. What they called cross-dressing was in many cases outlawed. So we were breaking the law just by being, and we didn't have the protection of the law, right? We could be evicted or lose our jobs or whatever the case might be, right? And that's just the system itself. That's not even when we start to talk about like the tools that the system chooses to use, right? Because all of the laws are backed up by violence, right? Police with guns, armies at borders, and these days by captivity, which I would hope that all of us who are animal advocates, have a real problem with captivity. So why am I bringing this all up? Because you're law students, or some of you are, and sometimes I've been troubled by the degree to which folks who want to create consequences for harming animals reach unthinkingly for prison. Just for example. And I also think, so I would like to see, and I'm hoping that this next generation of animal law people will be the ones who really bring animal law into the realm of transformative justice, restorative justice. What does that look like? It's really complicated when you try and do it on behalf of non-human animals, but I'm really hoping to see that. And I'm also just hoping that you'll queer your, I mean, and you probably already do, just queer the way that you see the law at all times, like, and understand that animal rights, you know, within a system that was founded by violence and is maintained by violence and is mostly about property, rights for animals can only be like a tactic rather than an end game. Like that system isn't going anywhere. And so within that system, we need to do whatever we can to take care of whoever we can take care of. And laws may be part of that. Rights may be part of that. But if we're really interested in animal liberation, then we do have to be thinking about contesting the very system that allows anybody to become property, including any trees. So I hope that's just something to think about. And now we will move to more hopeful thoughts before discussion. So I talked to you about Columbus and homophobia. One interesting story that often doesn't get told is actually about Balboa, another conquistador. And he was trying to impose patriarchal ideas about marriage on the Maya people of what is now Colombia. And they uprose against this successfully for a while, but then they were punished. And there's a woodcut of Balboa throwing the homosexuals to the hounds. But among the Maya people who have persisted, the word for sex is essentially the word play, which is like really different, right, than the heteronormative reprocentric way of thinking about it that we were talking about earlier. So I wanted to throw that out there as a piece of resistance. And in this book, Biological Exuberance, the Bruce Bajamil, the wildlife biologist who spent all this time collecting all of this data, suggests that, you know, yeah, sure. Animal homosexuality makes sense just within in ecological terms as a check on reproduction, right? We actually don't need everybody to be reproducing all the damn time. And so it's actually pretty helpful to a species if there are large numbers of folks who get their pleasure in other ways. But he says that's not even his primary explanation. He says, he calls it biological exuberance because he says, look, the sun is shining down so much energy every day. It's more than enough energy. Like there's more than enough. When things are in balance, whether it's non-human animals, whether it's humans in gatherer-hunter societies, they don't need to work but 4 hours a day. The rest is play. And I bring this up now because like if things were in balance, which they very much are not, if things were in balance, we would all be so much happier. And it's really important to remember how much happier we and others could be. So that's one thing I want to just make sure I point out. Along with living in the enchanted forest, there's a world of possible enchantment out there for us. But I also want to say, I want to bring us back to Jean-Paul and Jean-Claude, and I want to remember that, you know, it's funny when I tell the story, but from Jean-Claude's perspective, right? Here's this giant ape who keeps taking him away from his boyfriend and carrying him off. And what does he do? Does he be like, okay, well, that's it then? No. He walks down a field, and then he climbs a 6-foot fence, and then he walks through a forest, and then he walks down a road, and then he walks up a driveway and climbs another fence to be back with his boyfriend. And so this is the thing, is that those of us who have been outlaws for whatever reason have never just said, okay, then homosexuality here in the US, it was the death penalty in some states, still is in some places in this world. Same, not death penalty, but outlawed was the same for other kinds of relationships across what they called miscegenation across race, and it never has stopped us. Right? So, I mean, this is really important to remember. It never has stopped us. We keep on getting together with each other in the ways that we want to, because our desire, and I don't just mean sexual desire, but the desire for deep, deep connection, love, in any of its manifestations is much, much, much stronger than guns or governments. And so those of us who want animal liberation and see that it's a queer endeavor, we have an ally in that energy. It's like we have that in ourselves, that wish for we're social animals, and so it's like built into our bodies that what we want more than anything else is relationships, and we want them to be healthy and mutually pleasurable. And we want that more than anything. And so there we have our most powerful source of energy, and it is endlessly sustainable. And every single person whose behavior we want to change also has that wish in them. It's just been diverted into things like buying and selling, or plastic pleasures, or destination weddings, artisanal cheese. But what you're able to offer people instead of the ego pleasures of human supremacy, is a much more abiding and satisfying way of being in the world, right? Living in an enchanted forest with amazing other beings who are your fellows, not your possessions, and with whom you can have relationships and from whom you can learn. It's a beautiful way to be. And I just hope, and so I just want you to know that as much as queering animal liberation is about looking at these really hard things and grappling with knowledge that we might not want to have, it's also about recognizing how powerful that wish for relationship is, and drawing on that to sustain ourselves, and calling to it in other people to maybe help to motivate them to change. And so those were all the things that I wanted to tell you. And it looks like we do have time for questions or discussion or anything like that.
Yeah, and this can be as informal or formal as people would like. So if you want to just turn off your mic and start chatting. If you would rather raise your hand or put it in the chat, send me a message, whatever you're most comfortable with, that's what we're here for. So feel free to start. And thank you, Patrice, for engaging with us on this really important conversation. We're really glad you're here, so thank you.
I'm happy to be here.
Hi, actually, that was a fantastic talk. Thank you. There was, when you talked about transformative and restorative justice and what that potentially, or how that would apply, for example, in dealing with animal cruelty cases. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a law student, but the hairs, I just perked up and I was like, wow. I was wondering if you or some of the law students here could talk about what that would look like, since captivity and prison is really not it's not transformative. So I would be really curious to hear more about that.
Well, what I can say is I know that there are a lot of every time I talk about this or toss out something about this, a lot of people who are either law students and law professors are saying they're really interested in this. And so I'm hoping that there will be people, who are able, and I'm definitely willing to, be part of the conversation, but I don't feel any need to lead it. For me, it's about, if I think about that there's some complications in trying to figure out what this would look like for non-human animals, because for restorative justice, for example, we typically have a circle of people who were harmed by the offense. And then there's some conversation among those people and the perpetrator of the offense in order to arrive at what seems to everybody like it would be a fair thing for the perpetrator to do in order to try and make, to repair in some way the harm. And we can easily imagine how this would work, in the case of a young person who does some graffiti to, an older person in their neighborhood, and that person is harmed, and their kids who had this their adult children are harmed, and the parents of the youth are also harmed, and they can all sit together, and it might turn out that the elder who was graffitied or robbed or whatever the case might be, does not, in fact, at all want the young person to be locked up. They want the young person to go to college, doing their schoolwork might be what they want. We don't know what they will want, and so, but this is where it then gets tricky, right? Because for animals, the one person who wouldn't be able to be there to speak English or whatever language, whatever human language the circle was being conducted in, would be the victim or victims. Even if they're alive still, they're not. We're not able. I don't want to say they can't speak our language. We're not able to understand their language to a sufficient degree to ask. And so then it becomes a question of, well, who could be trusted to be the representative for this animal who was harmed, and who could maybe say what it might be possible. It might need to be a couple of people who are in some way expert. Maybe there would be a person who knew this particular animal. Maybe there would be some experts, who could actually say, well, this is probably what, they would want. And maybe, and who knows what it would be. I can think of a few things. But what we need at first is a few articles in some legal journals, and we need a few maybe mainstream articles in the kinds of publications that are read by people who are against the prison industrial complex and are interested in restorative justice, so that they can, so that we can think together about what this would look like. And not coincidentally, so that animal rights people wouldn't continue to look like, clueless supporters of the prison industrial complex every time we try to do something about animal cruelty.
Miranda, if you don't mind, and Patrice, if you don't mind, my name is Brittany Hill. Hello, all. I'm so glad that the topic of restorative justice came up. I'm actually an attorney with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, who is currently exploring restorative justice as an intervention for cruelty cases. So this is just perfect timing. And in fact, I gave a talk about this to many of the law school students on this call on Monday. So glad that you mentioned law review article, because I have a law review article coming out this summer.
Beautiful.
I'm happy to share that. Again, it is forthcoming, but happy to share that because I think it is such an interesting area. Again, it hasn't largely been explored. Again, it's very exciting yet daunting for sure to be exploring this. But as Pattrice laid out, I think that it is high time for us to be seeking alternative interventions for cruelty offenders. And definitely the way that restorative justice is currently used, again, it's growing in popularity for sure, isn't going to translate perfectly to crimes against animals, but that doesn't mean that it can't be used. And so as Pattrice was articulating, surrogate victims are often used in cases of crimes against humans when restorative justice is used. So just knowing the fact that surrogate victims can and are used, I think shows the fact that we can adapt it to crimes against animals. And again, the animals are the victims, but again, as Pattrice pointed out, they have a vocabulary of their own, and the fact that we can use surrogate victims, I think that means that we can advocate on their behalf. So I just wanted to put that out there. Pattrice, I would love to connect with you on this if you are if you are interested. Again, it's still in the very early stages. Getting the article out is sort of the first stage, but I've got thoughts and sort of dreaming all the dreams about implementation. I think there's something here for sure.
That's I'm psyched to hear that, Brittany. Please do. ALDF has my email address for sure.
Great.
So you can, because I mentioned this when I talked at an ALDF conference a few years ago, and it was interesting because I just sort of said it as a side note. I was really there to talk about other things, but I'm always mentioning this because it's been on my mind a long time. And that was, of all the things I said that day, that was the thing that most law students came up to me about, saying, I'm so glad somebody mentioned it. And every time, so I'll be happy also to, if I look back in my texts and things, I could probably find people who, you might want to, have review your paper or whatever.
Yeah, that would be great. Again, yeah, let's connect on this.
Yeah,
sounds
cool.
Great. Again, and wonderful talk, by the way. Thank you so much.
Hi, Pattrice. I had a question.
Okay.
I'm talking to you from Bolivia. As you know, it's a Latin country.
Mm.
And sadly, I can say, like, culturally, it's quite difficult to change people's minds regarding some of the things you were mentioning. So I was wondering which strategies, like concrete strategies, you found work with this change in the mentality of people. Because I think it's a very, I know it's going to be quite difficult to change some people's minds. And like you said, sometimes I doubt it, but I want to think like the same that you said, like in essence, humans are attracted to this queerness. And if they're offered an alternative, they will go for it, hopefully.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I also know that the groups in power and the groups that are in charge of governments and are like putting laws in place and everything are groups that are not interested in losing power and in losing this control of people. So I know which strategies come to your mind, like in changing this mentality and improving.
Well, so I'm thinking a lot of things all at once as you're talking. One, I'm thinking, I just heard from somebody in Bolivia about cockfighting this week. Someone who's working on that in Bolivia. So I know there are people working on that particular problem. And one of our strategies, I'm working my way around to answering. Not that there is one answer to your question, which is huge, but so one of the things that we think about here in the States about cockfighting, or we, by I mean Vine, is that we can see with that the law and order approach has not worked, right? So cockfighting is illegal in all 50 states, and it's one of the few crimes against animals that's actually actively pursued by law enforcement, not out of concern for the animals, but because gambling and violence tend to occur at cockfights as well. And so despite being illegal and despite being, the focus of intent law enforcement, it persists, right? So it persists because there's something that these that people are getting from it that they want enough to risk the legal consequences. And of course, for some of those people, it's the money of the gambling. But for the participants themselves, it seems to be the cockfighting. And it seems to be about, it's a lot about identity and about masculinity. And so one of the things that we're hoping to inspire people in different places where cockfighting is practiced to do is to find ways to offer some of what they're getting from this by other means. So one thing that's like really interesting about cockfighting, and I hope this isn't boring to people because I'm drilling into just one topic, but one thing that's really interesting is, so it's mostly almost exclusively boys and men. The men very much identify themselves with the fighting roosters, who are called cocks, and English is not the only language in which there's a word for rooster that's also a word for penis. And they do not think they are being cruel to these birds. They do not believe they are participating in animal cruelty. They believe sincerely that fighting is the natural state of these birds, and that they are allowing them to be themselves, and that we terrible feminists are trying to stop them from being their wonderful, glorious fighting male selves. And the men who participate in this, they spend hours every day with the birds, taking care of the birds. They mourn when they die. It's very complicated. It's very complicated. And so there are ways, and so we have to be thinking, particularly and it's different in every region. That's why I'm actually so glad you said I'm from Bolivia, and I'm asking, because it's not just every country, it's in, regions that are smaller than countries have their own identities, right? And so there are different, if we just think about even just cockfighting, there are different regions and different subsets of people who are participating in it. And in each of those places, there are going to be people who hate cockfighting, and they need to be the ones who are leading the effort for cultural change there. And they're the ones who are going to be able to think of ways where a boy who has some urge to be close to birds, to spend time with animals, doesn't end up pursuing cockfighting because that's the only way to do it while still being masculine. And we see this in the US, not just in cockfighting, but if you think about, and and I'm still thinking about your question, I promise, but it's just taking me places. So in the US, there's this program called Future Farmers of America, FFA, and also 4-H. And those are programs that teach animal agriculture to children, right? You've heard of these? Yeah, okay. And so one of our primary animal caregiver here went through this as a child. And so what she tells me, and what we've confirmed by looking at the research, is that it's mostly the children who want to be close to animals who sign up to do it. And then they get taught to use the animals as objects, and they get taught to tolerate selling their friends. And so we have numerous situations where what is happening is that people who, and especially children, who want to be close to animals somehow get tricked or diverted into animal exploiting occupations, because that's the only way to be close to animals. Now, if we start to see it that way, then we can say, okay, let's build in some ways for children who have that impulse to live out that impulse without having to learn to sell sheep or teach roosters to fight, right? So I guess that's a long way of saying that, what I was saying is a larger thing. It's or sort of a, no. So internally, inside every human, there's the wish for the connection, right? But every human is shaped by their circumstances. Humans build animal sanctuaries, humans build concentration camps. If there's one thing that, we're always claiming, we're the most this or the most that about ourselves, the smartest, or whatever the case might be. But I think if there's anything that's true about us is that we have the most what's called behavioral plasticity, the ability to behave differently in different situations. And so I think that the answer to your question, Lorna, is always local. It's always going to be, well, what are the circumstances in this particular place that are shaping human behavior in these particular ways, and how can we adjust the circumstances in that particular place? And if we can do that while being mindful of this wish that people have. The reason I'm drawing on that is we have a tendency, whatever bad things we're trying to do something against, we have a tendency to like scold the people who do it, or manipulate them out of doing it. And it can just be useful to understand that, just as every single moment in your life added up to you being here tonight with me. Every choice, that's true for every place you end up in life. This whole complex array of choice and circumstance led you to be where you are. And circumstance is something that we can shape. The social circumstances, the material circumstances in which people choose what things they're going to do are things that we can shape. And our efforts to do that, I think, always have to be local rather than anybody. I would always mistrust anybody who says like, well, this is the key, because there's never one. Did that answer at all? Was it at all helpful? Okay.
It looks like we have time for one more question. So Jill, do you want to hop in?
Sorry. Hi, Patrice.
Hi,
Fascinating
Jill.
Conversation. Thank you. I've been an
Thank you for
attorney.
being such an expressive listener. I really appreciate it. It helped me a lot.
I'm glad to hear that. I've been a lawyer for many years, but not in animal rights. It's just a passion of mine, animal rights. And I've been following the work of Brittany's organization a lot, the Animal Legal Defense Fund, because she and Stephen Wise have been working on those fascinating cases right now where they're trying to convince the courts in New York here that Happy the elephant needs to be put into a sanctuary. And it all comes down to what, when you were talking about, was it Jean-Claude and Jean Paul?
Yep.
The queer, beautiful queer couple, is that they have a sentience and an awareness. And the fact that they can even form those bonds is, it seems to me, a good direction that the courts seem to be trying to head in, to convince everybody that, Happy has feelings and is able to, to form relationships and, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same thing they talk about. It's not just dogs that do that and cats, but we want to try to stretch the argument out to other creatures, and looking at the concept of, what is it, non-human humans? What was the expression you were using?
Non-human persons?
Yeah, non-human persons. I think people have to get used to that, and slowly we'll see if we can chip away at it, because it's always the laws that are going to make some changes. And I'd love to see what happens with Happy and with the other cases. And it's been a rough road. I think there was one case out of the country that found that an animal was deemed to have some rights. And, courts have found all kinds of non-human persons to have rights. Like corporations have been considered to have non-human rights, and pieces of land and other things. So, kind of stretching that argument out to elephants and to others is a big challenge. So I think that the field is opening up. So many, years ago it was so little, but now it's expanding. So I just think a seminar like this is amazing. So that's what I want to say.
Well, thank you so much. And by you highlighting that term, non-human persons, it sort of takes me back to remembering what I was saying about the role of Eurocentrism, of the Columbus et al. In our current state of affairs. When you said non-human persons, I was just remembering that, like, here in Vermont, the Abenaki people, who were the original human inhabitants of this land, did historically think of other animals as what we would consider non-human persons. Like that was even the phrase that, like, people writing about their culture long before animal rights people were using that phrase. That was the phrase that people came up with to say, well, look, this is how the original inhabitants of this place thought of other animals as non-human persons. So, right. In some ways it's a matter of sort of dragging the law, which was imposed on this place, back to, recognizing some of the things that the people who lived here first knew.
Great. Well, I think we are about just out of time, so we will start to wrap things up. But thank you so much again, Pattrice, for sharing your time, your experiences, and your expertise with us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who joined us to both listen and to discuss this important topic. So thank you so much. Before we all head out for the rest of the day or evening, I just want to put a plug and say that our next symposium event is going to be on Wednesday, March 31st at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Dr. Aisha Akhtar will be exploring the ways in which animal testing harms humans, the systemic barriers to shifting away from animal models, and then also possible solutions moving forward in that arena. So thank you again, everyone, for coming, and we will see you in a few weeks.